Shadow Hack. Chapter 381, Coming Out of Seclusion on Cloud Island. The servant class people of the Cloud Island provided Li Yunmu with the best wooden house available. Each one of them was extremely grateful for his sincere goodwill. Although the goods taken out by Li Yunmu, which included the food and essentials used by ordinary people, weren't worth much in his eyes, it was like New Year's for the 10 or so households living in that place. They could fill their bellies for several months with those goods while also greatly replenishing their essential needs. Li Yunmu had also given them some medicine, which made them grateful to the point that tears started flowing down their eyes. His action was akin to giving them new life. It had to be known that they couldn't even set sail, let alone purchase medicine. If any of them fell ill, their fate would be entirely in their own hands. This was the life of the servant class people of the origin world. Although the world was extremely vast, there was no place where such people could seek shelter for themselves. Compared to the people living in the slums on Earth, their fate was even more miserable. At least there was no slavery on Earth. Besides that, the taxes levied by the continents on Earth weren't as exorbitant as those in the origin world. More than half of civilians' earnings would be used to pay the taxes, which could easily describe the administrative system of the origin world. Although Zhang and his group had set sail a day earlier than Li Yunmu, it would take them at least 10 days to reach the island, given the cruise's speed, if their trip went without a hitch. Naturally, if the situation turned adverse, like if they encountered some nasty weather or an attack from a sea beast, they may be delayed for another 10 or 15 days. Knowing that, Li Yunmu naturally wouldn't wait for them without doing anything. Availing himself of the time, Li Yunmu entered his consciousness sea, where his gaze fell upon the large amount of experience points. It was fine when he didn't know about it, but once he saw it, he was stunned. The amount of marine life in the oceans of the origin world was virtually inexhaustible. It had been a while since Li Yunmu had checked on his experience points, and the amount had already soared to more than 31 million. This was more than enough to acquire the 11th shadow. Li Yunmu immediately congealed it without any hesitation. It also happened to solve the problem of no shadow following him at this time. Once the 11th shadow was congealed, Li Yunmu commanded it to guard the outside and not allow anyone to discover the coordinates of his heavenly world. After that, he entered that place. He then continued with soaking in the medicinal bath while rotating the meridian nurturing flux point method, while on his free time, he continued refining more power grains using his a cauldron. He truly felt that possessing a personal heavenly world was a great blessing. Its only weak point was the coordinates required to enter it. As long as the owner entered his heavenly world, the coordinates would be exposed to the world. If someone outside discovered them, they could easily enter Li Yunmu's heavenly world, provided that there was no one guarding the location outside. If it was an ordinary person who discovered it, then it wouldn't matter. Even if someone like that entered the heavenly world, then given that within the heavenly world Li Yunmu could utilize 10 times more world power compared to the outside, he was basically like a god who could deal with anything. After all, when possessing 10 times more world power and his personal strength as foundation, he could easily deal with enemies who were several times more powerful than him. But if the person entering was a sage flux expert, Li Yunmu's fate would be tragic. With the enormous difference between their strengths, even if he could utilize 10 times more world power, Li Yunmu, who was the so-called god of his world, would be killed in that same world of his own. Thus, there was no absolute rule in this world, or as system has said repeatedly, only absolute power was an eternal truth. Only absolute strength could destroy all restrictions. That was the reason why Fluxers with lower cultivation on Earth would keep it a secret that they possessed a heavenly world. Until their strength increased enough, or before their heavenly world congealed 5 suns, no one would take the initiative to make the news of their heavenly world public. Otherwise, if people set their gazes on them, it wouldn't end well. It was highly possible that with the right coordinates, powerful people would intrude in the other's heavenly world to kill them and seize their world. As long as the world master perished within the world and the attacker was also inside, it was highly possible that the attacker could snatch it before the heavenly world collapsed after the master's death. Given that reason, Li Yunmei was extremely cautious when he entered his heavenly world. Every time, he would use one of the shadows to guard the location. If something happened, he would at least be alerted and could come out immediately, making sure that the entrance coordinates were concealed again. The shadow may not be able to obstruct a powerful enemy, but it could serve the purpose of alerting Li Yunmei. Just that little use was enough of a reason for him to use such a tactic. The 11th shadow had by then transformed into a real shadow and blended with the darkness under the roof. With its innate characteristic, even a deity wouldn't be able to discover its existence until it moved. Li Yunmei was quite relieved because of that fact. For the following 12 days, he remained in seclusion in his heavenly world. Every day, he would practice meridian nurturing flux point technique. He would soak in the medicinal bath 3 times a day and would take 5 meals of extreme grade power grain. His daily intake of food was comparatively enormous. Until the 12th day, the amount of power grain he ate had increased from several tens per day to more than 100 grain. Such an enormous intake was naturally related to meridian nurturing flux point technique and Great Sun Thunder Tyrant body muscle marrow secrets. Even without using the system to scan himself, Li Yunmei could feel that his body was becoming increasingly more formidable. He felt as if he was an unstoppable machine with endless power and the ability to destroy celestial bodies with one punch. Host, the appointed time has come. Allow me to remind you that it is already the 12th day, the system reminded him. Oh, the 12th day has arrived so quickly. Everyone said that there was never enough time to cultivate, and Li Yunmei felt the same, after having thrown all of himself into cultivation. The past 10 days had passed in a blink of an eye for him. Yes. Li Yunmei opened his eyes and asked, "Is Zhang Chuan already here?" According to the data from the 11th shadow, there has been no change in the lives of the people on the island, the system replied. Chapter 382, Strengthened Flux Points. Warn me when there is some movement. Li Yunmei didn't continue to think about that matter. The current moment was a crucial one for him, because he could sense that the process of complementing his flux points had already reached the last stage. If his conjuncture wasn't wrong, then he would only need to wait for another day and the flaw in his flux points would be removed. He then entered the medicinal liquid again. After a day, large amounts of steam began to bubble forth from the bathtub. Li Yunmei was like a heated core at that moment. His body resembled that of a prawn in the process of being cooked, having turned red from the boiling. He continued breathing heavily, inhaling and exhaling like a ventilator fan. He ruthlessly howled in a shrill tone, and the Great Heart mode was forcefully activated without him doing it. Boom, boom, boom. Each sound echoed louder and heavier than the last one. They were like claps of thunder, shaking the whole heavenly world. At the same time, Li Yunmei's Great Heart was throbbing at its fastest speed. The swift blood circulation gradually pushed his body to its limit. Power, a terrifying and explosive power, seemed to be on the verge of bursting from his body. He howled, and there was a loud rumble that echoed through the world. Then Li Yunmei, who was almost on the verge of exploding, opened his eyes and revealed a chilling gaze. He then continued to howl for a long time. Once he felt like he had poured his mind out, he looked at the situation of his body. As for the bathtub, it had been shattered by the explosive howls. Success finally took care of the defects. Once Li Yunmei's mind calmed, an expression of delight which couldn't be concealed appeared on his face. After finally removing the final trace of innate weakness of his flux points, he felt as if some concealed shackles around his body had collapsed. He was certain that he had broken through and surpassed his own limits. After experiencing that, Li Yunmei became clearly aware of something. Regardless of how much the quasi-deities from his earth strived to improve, until the day they could take care of the deficiencies of their body and throw off the invisible chains, their desire to become deities would remain a joke and nothing more. The true cage restricting them wasn't earth, but rather their own body. At this instant, Li Yunmei completely understood everything, there was a loud bang. He heavily stamped on the ground, and his figure disappeared from view. After a few seconds, he appeared at the edge of the heavenly world. The gravity there wasn't as strong as in the origin world, so his speed broke through the barrier of sound. This was the most terrifying reflection of breaking through chains binding the human body. Li Yunmu punched into the void, and the sound of a missile being launched echoed in the air. The speed of the punch, however, far surpassed that of a missile. There had been a quantitative improvement in Li Yunmu's strength. Since the innate deficiency of his flux points had been taken care of, he was at the same starting point as the natives of the origin world. The most important discovery was that the meridian nurturing flux point method really wasn't simple. Although the ancient skill was a secret method which could strengthen 5 things, but didn't make one's flux points more powerful than those of natives, Li Yunmu could still sense a concealed flame inside his transformed flux points which were full of vitality. That flame was continuously burning the flux energy stored inside the flux points, purifying it even more. He was certain that if that process continued for a long time, his flux energy's purity would surpass that of flux experts of the origin world, let alone those of Earth's fluxers. Apart from that, because of meridian nurturing flux point method, his meridians had become even more stable and wider as well as thicker compared to before. As an indirect result of that, if Li Yunmu burst forth with his flux energy, his strength would surpass that of the same level flux experts. Developing flux points, nurturing meridians, strengthening muscles, transforming blood, and substituting organs. Clearly, the secret method didn't cheat people. Not only that, but the results were even better than written in the summary. Li Yunmu was clearly benefiting from cultivating the first 2 of the 5 parts. After the nurturing of meridians and developing flux points, they had surpassed those of the origin world's flux experts. Moreover, as long as Li Yunmu continued to cultivate them, his flux points and meridians would become increasingly firmer and more powerful. And the disparity between him and other flux experts would continue to become large and larger. What level of body strengthening secret technique is this exactly? Li Yunmu was secretly shocked. He had only cultivated the technique for a month, and the results could already be seen clearly. His flux points and meridians had already transformed greatly. Heavens only knew what realm he'd reach if he could cultivate the other 3 parts, too. System, what is my current physical strength? Li Yunmu suddenly asked. It has already reached 35 oxen, the system quickly replied. The 10 days of bitter cultivation hadn't been in vain. Li Yunmu's strength had increased again. From 29 oxen before, it had went up to 35 oxen in one go. That level of physical strength could already be considered outrageous. With it, he would be considered among the high-level flux experts in the origin world, let alone on his Earth. There, he could blow away any fluxer with his strength of 35 oxen. People like Zhanbei, Mantian, and the others who were considered to have strong physical bodies could also be blown away by one punch by then. What he'd come through was a transformation, an enormous transformation. I wonder what is the situation of Hai Yu, Zhanbei, and the others. When thinking of other descenders, a hint of a smile appeared on Li Yunmu's face. He no longer had any enmity with those fellow competitors. The increase in his strength had caused him to change mentally. The difference between the past him and the present him was like a difference between a pit bull and a tiger. Regardless of what a pit bull did, how could a tiger be concerned about it? Even if a pit bull could be considered as fairly strong, its canines still wouldn't be able to pierce through a tiger's skin, while the tiger could break its bones and tear its muscles with one palm. However, Li Yunmu didn't dare to get too confident. He could already sense that as his physical body became increasingly more formidable, his bottleneck also became deep-rooted. When he had come out of seclusion last time, his strength had increased by 12 oxen, while presently his strength had only increased by 6 oxen. So the results weren't as good as the first time. The main reason for that was because as his strength increased, he got closer to the human body's limits, so his strength naturally increased more slowly. It was like the 100m world record for men before the coming of Flux energy. Even if it had been run within less than 10 seconds at the start, but later on cutting it down by 1 second hadn't been possible, let alone by a large margin. Li Yunmu then took out his remaining flux binding pills and replenished his flux energy. His flux points had developed, so they naturally could absorb flux energy again. On the 14th day, the system scanned Li Yunmu's data again. The strength of his flux energy had risen from 70-something points to 110 points, while his physical strength was 35 oxen. Not considering his comprehensive strength, just based on this data alone, the present Li Yunmu could easily deal with He Mianshen, the master of the 10th room. Chapter 383, Unfortunate Descenders. Several hundred miles away from Cloud Island where Li Yunmu waited was Zhang Chuan and his group. By then, their hardships could no longer be described with words. As the old saying went, they had crossed many mountains just to find a tiger. The luck of Zhang Quan's group was not good. It was the first time they set out to sea, and in the brief period of 10 days, they had faced endless troubles. First, they encountered the most famous and frequent ocean current fluctuations. They were created by the level of water at different depths flowing backwards and giving rise to strong winds such as those from tsunamis. In North Blue, they would happen from twice to 10 times a month. There was no regular pattern to their appearance, so fishermen who couldn't build large and sturdy ships wouldn't go a nautical mile away from their island. Zhang Quan's financial situation was quite good. Although he was a newcomer to Blue Moon Island, he was able to buy a large cruise ship, which caused many people to pay attention to him. Relying on that ship, he didn't need to fear the ocean currents. Yet during the 10 days, he had encountered 5 attacks from ocean currents in succession. Everyone on the ship couldn't believe how abysmal was their luck. In the last 2 days, the ocean currents had finally subsided. But Zhang Chuan and his group didn't have any time to rejoice, because they had encountered another matter which was even more terrifying than the ocean currents. They had attracted the attention of an enormous beast. Their luck was truly rotten. Under normal circumstance, the old and powerful enormous beasts weren't fond of finding trouble with humans. After all, history had repeatedly hammered them with the fact that they weren't species with which one could trifle. If the beasts were careless, they might attracted the attention of some formidable humans it couldn't face. Because of that, the older the enormous beast was, the more they would avoid provoking humanity. But since old enormous beasts existed, young enormous beasts also existed. There were also those who had just become enormous beasts. The one which had focused its attention on Zhang Quan's group of course belonged to the latter group. Besides, only the young enormous beasts would leave the deep sea region and come to the surface to have fun or breathe fresh air. The ship had tried to pull away from it, but the young enormous beast was powerful and unwilling to let them go. When the young enormous beast, which was a clawed octopus and barely the length of 100 meters, saw the ship pull away, it was enraged. Its main body was surprisingly 36 meters long and each of its 8 tentacles reached 100 meters and were as thick as pillars. The enormous clawed octopus was extremely excited to play with the cruise ship and would occasionally use 2 of its tentacles to heavily slam it. Fortunately, the cruise was created from iron pistol wood. Moreover, Zhang Chuan had paid great attention to ensuring their safety. The planks of the cruise ship were extra thick, because of which the defense of the ship surpassed that of other ships by 50%. Naturally, the price of the ship had also been double because of that. But Zhang Chuan hadn't been petty when dealing with their safety, or else they would have been finished long ago. However, although they weren't in danger for the time being, the ship would collapse if it was battered by the enormous beast for a long period of time. There are still a few hundred kilometers left. Please last a bit longer so we can reach Cloud Island. Everyone was just hoping for that one thing. Zhang Chuan, Wang Yan, and Luo Honghua, the 3 descenders, finally gained some first-hand experience of the dangers of the origin world. It weren't just the humans that were frightening, in fact, all the living creatures in that world were far more terrifying than those from their original plane. Although the enormous beasts couldn't use human speech, they wouldn't be any inferior to humans once their intellect matured. Zhang Chuan and the others held on to the hope that the octopus would think better of it and leave them alone. But how could the enormous clawed octopus know about this? The only thing on its mind was that it wasn't willing to let go of this prey which it had chased for so long. Soon, the ship in front of its eyes would shatter. Thus, it began to attack even more fiercely. It wanted to catch its prey before it could reach its target. Humans, delicious refreshments. The enormous clawed beast slammed its tentacles against the ship once more. How many days has it been? Li Yunmu asked with creased brows while gazing in the direction of Blue Moon Island. It's the 17th day, the system answered. With the ordinary navigation and cruise ship's speed, it should have taken 13 to 15 days to reach the island. Yet it was already the 17th day. Li Yunmu could guess that the other party had met with some sort of mishap. He only hoped that it was nothing major, since otherwise his scheme to enter Zhen Kuang's group would have been in vain. Li Yunmu hadn't dealt with that man not because he felt benevolent, but only because he wanted to learn about the secret with which Zhang Chuan had come to the origin world. The knowledge he held might help him quickly achieve his aims. This was Li Yunmu's true goal. Elder brother, are you very fond of the ocean? While Li Yunmu was pondering about his matters, a shy voice came from behind. He didn't need to turn around to know that it was the lass whom he had run into frequently in the past few days. She feared and revered him at the same time. It would only be right to say that all of the 10 households acted in that way. They were afraid of Li Yunmu, but also carried a hint of gratefulness for this man which had come from the ocean. But for the most part it was just fear. After all, they didn't know from where the outsider had come, and what sort of changes he brought with him. They were just aware that he was a physical flux expert. These kind of cultivators were part of the lowest level on Blue Moon Island, but on the small isle, they were no different from gods. Thus, no one dared to provoke him. Even if the natives had innate strength reaching a couple oxen, with the most powerful reaching 9 oxen, the difference between learning physical battle skills and simply using brute force to attack was extremely vast. Not to mention, who knew how much physical strength Li Yunmu possessed. Yes, I like the ocean very much, I like its boundlessness. When Li Yunmu heard the voice behind him, it was as if cold snow had melted from his wrinkled brows. Tutu, all the others are afraid of me, so how are you not? Li Yunmu turned around and smiled toward the lass. He could sense that she was afraid of him, but despite that she had come to his side. Chapter 384, Little Lass Tutu. The lass was called Tutu, and she didn't have any family name because the descendants of slaves didn't have the qualifications to get a family name. According to what Li Yunmu knew, her father and mother had died long ago. They had been chased and killed by the people who worked for their master. Thus, Tutu hadn't fared well in the last 2 years on the island. The other residents had extremely difficult lives themselves, so they didn't have the attention to spare for the 7-year-old lass. Fortunately, the residents hadn't lost their humanity completely. Despite not being well off, each household still cared for the little lassie. It could be said that Tutu had survived for that long because of other residents' concern in her mouth. Although the second reason didn't sound pretty, it just meant that she lived by eating insects and bugs. Elder brother, Tutu is also very afraid of you, but Tutu had matured beyond what someone would expect from a 7-year-old girl. She clenched her teeth and said after summoning her courage, Tutu also wants to become a physical flux expert like you and become a formidable cultivator. Why do you want to be a physical flux expert? Li Yunmu was startled. He hadn't expected that a little girl who was struggling to survive would surprisingly hold such ambitions in her heart. At least the other residents of Cloud Island didn't have any such ambitions. The other children only followed him from far away, hoping to obtain some candy. I just want to eat my fill every day, the little lass said with her head bowed. However, her 2 eyes were still shining brightly. Only want to eat your fill, Li Yunmu mumbled. While looking at Tutu, he had to admit that his heart was moved. Her reason was very simple. It wasn't to become formidable or to take revenge, but only to eat her fill. The little girl might have never experienced the feeling of being full. But Li Yunmu didn't say anything in the end. Although the little girl was hoping that he would guide her on the path of cultivation, he wasn't that type of person. If being honest, Li Yunmu couldn't be considered a benevolent person. Although he wasn't stone-hearted, he wasn't overflowing with kind intentions either. There were many children in the origin world whose fate was the same as that of Tutu. It was impossible for him to take this girl under his wing just because he was slightly moved. He couldn't be willful and take this burden onto himself. You are too young for cultivation, but elder brother has something for you. This will slowly transform you as well as fill you up. Li Yunmu pondered it for a moment and then took out a small pouch. It was his normal ration, which included 1,000 grains of extreme grade power grain. If Li Yunmu ate them himself without soaking in the medicinal bath to cultivate meridian nurturing flux point technique, it would probably last him for 10-15 days. But for Tutu it would last for a whole year. Tutu was very disappointed, but she didn't lose hope and asked while forcefully restraining her tears, "Elder brother, what is this?" Li Yunmu steeled his heart and explained, "This is food eaten by flux experts." Flux experts? The eyes of the little lass went wide. From what she knew, physical flux experts were extremely scary. Since she could remember herself, she had heard all sorts of descriptions from her parents as well the other villagers about how formidable and fearless were those people. She had heard a lot less about flux experts, but it wasn't because the slaves weren't aware of their existence. Instead, they saw flux experts as far superior characters whom they would definitely never meet. When Li Yunmu had stayed on Azure Dragon Island, the fishermen in the villages had rarely seen flux experts, then what to speak of the little island's residents? Yes, so there are some things which you must know. At first, you should only eat half a grain, and if you feel that your stomach is full, then you shouldn't eat any more until you feel hungry again. Understood? Li Yunmu warned her. Tutu hadn't come in contact with any high-level matters, so she just nodded with confusion on her face. Remember, if you wish to become powerful and later fill your stomach by relying on your own strength, you mustn't overeat or tell a third soul about what I gave you, Li Yunmu told her. It was the simplest method which Li Yunmu could think of to change Tutu's fate. Even physical flux experts didn't get to eat extreme grade power grain. After eating it, even if the little lass couldn't find anyone to teach her to cultivate in the future, during the time she was underage, the power grain would have changed her fate enough anyway. Naturally, the premise was that she followed his 3 warnings. Elder brother, if Tutu eats this power grain, will her body become strong and powerful like that of the physical flux experts? The girl asked in response. Yes, but no one other than us should know about it. Li Yunmu nodded and then returned to his residence without paying any more attention to her. That day was already his 17th day on the island. Given that Zhang had set sail a day earlier, it had already been 18 days since the start of the voyage. Li Yunmu decided that if they didn't show up in 2 more days, he would leave. The innate flaw in his flux points had been removed, and he had also accumulated enough extreme-grade power grain, so it was time for him to attack the boundary of becoming a great flux expert. He wanted to return to Blue Moon Sect in exchange for the methods to open flux points. This was his target as well as the path which every descender would have to travel to become a great flux master. In the following 2 days, Li Yunmu didn't enter seclusion. He leisurely strolled around, occasionally fished and entered ocean from time to time to catch some organisms in the shallow waters and put them in his heavenly world's spring. Although the majority of them were saltwater organisms and not suitable to fresh water, they didn't die for a long time. Seeing this, Li Yunmu realized that he couldn't underestimate the formidable life forms of the origin world. After 2 days, 4 species had adapted to fresh water from the 73 species he had collected. It was a pleasant accident. In the 2 days, Tutu would appear by his side every day. But the little lassie was extremely intelligent and understood that Li Yunmia wouldn't be taking her with him because he didn't want the extra trouble. Therefore, she stayed a distance away, remaining behind his back, silently watching his every action. The only change was that after eating power grains for 2 days, color had returned to her face, and she seemed to have a hint of vitality. Li Yunmia was unable to understand the actions of the little girl. Why was she still continuing to watch him from far? However, he didn't bother to find out. He was just happy that she seemed to have followed his warnings. In the 2 days, Li Yunmia hadn't sensed any residents learning about the power grain. The 20th day came and went away. On the 21st day, Li Yunmia decided to leave. He walked out of his residence early in the morning, having woken up unusually early. Chapter 385, Secret Competition. Elder brother, are you leaving? On the 21st day, Li Yunmia woke up early and bid farewell to the residents of the island. Before he left, the little lass Tutu stepped out from the group of people and summoned her courage to chase after him. Yes, live properly. After seeing Tutu, he became free from worry and patted her little head. Then, elder brother, will you be returning? The little lass looked at Li Yunmia with her gaze full of hope and nervousness. I might not. You must work hard and become strong. Li Yunmia didn't look at Tutu's disappointed gaze. The next instant, he went to the coast and took out the deep ocean pearl given to him by the sea breeze whale. It had told him that if any of the races subservient to it were in the vicinity of Cloud Island and he needed a mount, he could summon them. And at that moment, that was exactly the situation. Li Yunmia was very curious since he didn't know what sort of sea beast races were subservient to the sea breeze whale. He had just placed the deep ocean pearl in the water and congealed an intent to summon when the people on the Cloud Island behind him cried out in surprise. Tutu suddenly pointed into the distant horizon. Elder brother, a ship has appeared in the distance. Are they the people you were waiting for? For the people living on the small isle, the mast in the horizon wasn't that strange since the only thing possessing such an object would be a ship. After another half a day, an enormous ship gradually appeared in the horizon. Even if it was still 2-3 kilometers away, the several 100-meter cruise could be easily recognized. Wow, what a large ship! How many small boats could be made from the wood of that large ship? It would be great if my dad could get one. Seeing the enormous ship, the children on the island began to whisper to each other. Even a tens of meter large ship would be considered very large by those people. So when they saw the several 100-meter long one in front of their eyes, they were left dumbstruck. That's right, seems like they've come. Li Yunmia's vision was sharper than that of the residents. He could already see a female figure standing on the deck, gazing at the island. That woman was Wang Yan. After a long time, the several 100-meter cruise stopped and everyone on the ship used speedboats to come to the island. Haha, brother Li, you are really a person who keeps his word. I am excited to see you again. Zhang Xuan immediately took the lead and walked toward Li Yunmia in large strides and hugged him. His expression was completely honest, without the slightest hint of acting. Wang Yan's eyes were slightly moist, watching Li Yunmia with endless excitement. How are you all? What sort of obstacle did you encounter? Li Yunmia nodded toward the group to greet them. Everyone was a fellow resident of Residential Area 15, even if some faces looked really nervous. Although he didn't know everyone's name, they did seem familiar. It's hard to explain in a few words. We were fortunate when faced with great misfortune. We snatched back our lives back from gates of hell. Yet you brother Li seem to have come long ago without any problems, one of the familiar people in Zhang Quan's group spat out fiercely, feeling excited by getting a new lease on life. After that, the group found a temporary place to settle. After Li Yunmia heard the whole story from Zhang Quan, a strange expression appeared on his face. Brother Yunmia, if that giant beast hadn't given up on chasing us after we got close to Cloud Island, we probably would have been finished. Wang Yan occupied the space beside Li Yunmu as if it was completely natural and began supplying details on the dangers they had experienced. Her previous noble temperament was nowhere to be seen. She simply kept on smiling gracefully while sitting near Li Yunmu. A male with sleek cheekbones suddenly came forward and interrupted Wang Yan, who was still talking, extending his hand to greet Li Yunmu. "I am called Zhang Yuan, and I occupy the 23rd room. Not long ago, I received an invitation from Maplewood's Union, so in the future we will all be on the same side." The man had a rather fierce expression on his face, which combined with his prominent facial features made sure that anyone who saw him would not forget his appearance. Another relatively special thing was that given Zhang Quan's stature, he was clearly a noble. Wang Yan's cheerfulness disappeared after being interrupted, and she looked at Li Yunmu with anxiousness. Li Yunmu didn't pay any attention to the other, but reached out to shake his hand with a smile. However, the next instant he sensed that something was wrong. The other party was using a large amount of force to grasp his hand, sending his enormous power through the contact. The amount of power was extremely great. If Li Yunmu had needed to face it before he had come to Cloud Island, when his physical strength was only 29 oxen, he probably wouldn't have been able to endure it without being prepared. But at that moment his expression only changed a little, he was completely relaxed. Zhang Yuan entered Blue Moon sect last year. His ambitions are ordinary, but his conduct is rather fearless. There have been rumors that he had been involved in framing fellow disciples. Presently he occupies the 23rd room, which he obtained 5 months ago. His flux energy strength is 118 points, and his physical strength is 32 oxen. With only a handshake, the system had gathered all the data about Zhang Yuan's strength. It also provided all the basic information gathered about him from the 15th residential region. After descending to the origin world, the system could no longer use any internet services. Instead, it used the 10-dimensional space eyes and gathered a large amount of information about the people of 15th residential region as well as some other residential regions of Blue Moon sect. Of course, it was all due to the dimensional space eyes. Li Yunmu had purchased 3 of them from the underground market, while Battle Sage Vega had provided him with 10 more before descending. He had to admit that being a representative of someone was indeed a great option. If he hadn't obtained so many trump cards from Battle Sage Vega, he probably would have had to face a lot more obstructions. It was obvious that the quasi-deities had prepared for a long time. 32 oxen? Close to 120 points? Li Yunmu was secretly startled. The Zhang Chuan who had stayed in the 15th residential region with that level of strength was certainly not simple. Chapter 386, Maplewood Alliance. Zhang Yuan had the strength to fight the masters of first 10 rooms, but he had silently occupied a room in the back, just like Li Yunmu. It had to be known that He Mianshen, who was the master of 10th room, had only had the physical strength of 20 oxen as well as close to 90 points in flux energy. Although after the challenges of newcomers the average strength of the masters of the first 10 rooms had increased, Zhang Yuan, given his strength, could still have obtained one of the first 10 rooms. Li Yunmu hadn't expected that Zhang Quan's methods would be so clever that he would be able to pull in such a high-level character. However, all of his apprehensions about Zhang Yuan were unnecessary. Since Li Yunmu had joined the group, there was no way that Zhang Yuan would be able to prevail over him. After all, what sort of person was Li Yunmu? Even if the opponent's strength was close to his, he cultivated several A-grade cultivation methods obtained from the system as well as 8 absolute defense techniques. Moreover, he also had the 11 shadows and world power as his trump cards, not even mentioning the 3 pieces of Azure Dragon Deity battlesuit. Thus, given his strength, Zhang Yuan wasn't worth paying attention. When Zhang Yuan, who was opposite him, saw that Li Yunmu's face only slightly transformed and he was still able to silently grip his hand, his complexion turned ugly. Zhang Quan's expression also turned blank. He had believed that Li Yunmu had great potential, but he hadn't expected that his strength would increase so quickly. Perhaps his accomplishments in terms of physical strength were very formidable? Within their group, there were many people who had set their hearts on Wang Yan and felt indignant. But when they saw Li Yunmu and Zhang Yuan pitting themselves against each other, their thoughts instantly disappeared. After all, in the origin world strength reigned supreme. It was the most important criterion. Li Yunmu, who was the master of 50th room, hadn't displayed his full strength before, but seeing that handshake was enough for people to understand it. In their group, Zhang Yuan was the most formidable person. So given that Li Yunmu had easily endured his sneak attack, everyone became aware that Li Yunmu wasn't any less powerful. Zhang Yuan's complexion was very unsightly, but he quickly released his hand and said in a gloomy voice, "Brother Li, you have truly concealed yourself deeply. You flatter me. It hasn't been long since I became a flux expert and only have a bit of strength which couldn't be regarded as anything," Li Yunmu replied. Between the two of them, Li Yunmu's evaluation changed greatly in the group. Compared to Zhang Yuan, who was overbearing, Li Yunmu was low-pitched and gentle, giving a feeling of closeness to everyone. They felt that he was quite good and they should maintain contact with him. It was no wonder then that Wang Yan had fallen for him. Although the group didn't have many women, but apart from Luo Honghua, who was gnashing her teeth, Li Yunmu's gentle and elegant temperament gained him a favorable opinion among their small population. The anxious residents of the small island naturally didn't understand what was happening. As ordinary people, they only thought that the two were introducing themselves. When a group of powerful flux experts suddenly appeared on the island, they were all stupefied. However, Zhang Quan's group didn't make things difficult for them. However, for the group of servant class people living on the island, it was unexpected. "Brother Zhang, I heard that you required Cloud Island's ghost silk pollen. I had them prepare the required amount in advance," Li Yunmu said. "Good, good, very good. Since Brother Li has already made the preparations, we won't need to stay on this island for long. We will rest for a night and early morning tomorrow, we will set sail." Zhang Chuan was greatly excited by Li Yunmu's words. After experiencing the perils of the ocean, they had already become late by a few days, and he was hating that he was unable to reach the underground cave as fast as possible. Once he heard that Li Yunmu had already prepared the ghost silk pollen, it was naturally something he was happy to learn of it. Ghost silk pollen was the only specialty of Cloud Island. It bloomed on a tree called Ghost Pollen Tree. Every year, it would bloom in that season. People who wanted to collect it had to do it in the half-month. Otherwise, once they missed, the pollen would drift away with the wind and disappear. As for the use of the ghost silk pollen, there were many. It was an indispensable item for a flux expert or even a great flux expert who wanted to explore unknown territories like the secret underground cave. Its odor could intimidate the majority of extremely poisonous vicious beasts. When mixed together with water, it could purify poisonous objects. Besides that, when it was used together with water, it was like a natural medicine for detoxifying. Perhaps because he knew something, Zhang Chuan wanted to obtain a large amount of ghost silk pollen for their trip. The amount available in the market wasn't sufficient, so they had to make a trip to Cloud Island. When the residents learned that the people would leave in a day, they instantly looked at Li Yunmu with gratefulness in their eyes. If not for their good relationship with him, they definitely wouldn't be treated so properly. In the worst-case scenario, the flux experts might have already eliminated them. It was quite a normal affair. The lives of slaves, especially those who weren't under any master, weren't any different from those of ants. Even if they died, there wouldn't be any problems for the flux experts. The night passed quietly, and the next day came. The group set sail at dawn. Their aim was an unknown isolated island which contained the secret cave. As for the exact location, only Zhang Chuan, Wang Yan, and Luo Honghua knew it. It was supposedly 300 nautical miles away from Cloud Island. Given the speed of the cruise ship, they would reach it in half a day, if their journey went without any problems. Everyone was anxious that the ship may not be able to bear the burden of an enormous beast's attacks anymore. If it came again, they wouldn't be able to last for long. But they didn't have much of a choice. Moreover, there wasn't much of a chance to encounter an enormous beast. The majority of the sea beasts who attacked ships were from the vicious beast grade, and Zhang Quan's group had countless methods to deal with them. When embarking, one person suddenly wrote, "Oh, that's right, Brother Li, where's your ship?" "I used a vicious beast mount, fortunately its speed was very fast," Li Yunmiu calmly replied. When the group heard it, they stopped in their actions. His ability to use vicious beasts as mounts reflected his strength. After all, the classification vicious beast strength was different than that of human flux experts. A vicious beast who could be used as a mount was definitely an adult vicious beast. Regardless of their strength or body build, the vicious beast level sea monsters were somewhat more formidable than vicious beasts that lived on the land. Because of that, Li Yunmiu's strength and mysteriousness caused him to become an enigma in everyone's eyes. After stepping on the ship, Li Yunmiu for the first time saw a hull with numerous cracks. Once he saw it, even he felt nervous. If it had been an ordinary ship, it would have been smashed by the enormous beast's attacks long ago. On top of the ship, a blue flag flapped in the air. There was a pattern of a large island on it, along with a blue sky without a moon. It was the flag of Blue Moon Island. On the bottom right corner of the flag, there was another, smaller one. It was bright-colored and had a lot of logs engraved upon it with 3 characters Maplewood Alliance written upon them in a flamboyant manner. Based on the information that Li Yunmiu knew about Zhang Quan and his companions, Maplewood Alliance was most likely the name of the power to which they were affiliated. Naturally, those who didn't know about Zhang Quan's real identity wouldn't be able to make the relation between the two. During the journey, everyone got some rest in their rooms apart from the boatmen. In time, the ship halted. Afterwards Li Yunmiu heard people notifying others that they had reached their destination. "So this is where the mysterious island is? Looks like I will soon be able to see through their veil of secrecy." Li Yunmiu grew alert, feeling quite excited for the future. Chapter 387, Zhang Yuan starts creating trouble. What caught people off guard was that when everyone reached the location which only Zhang Quan knew about, there was no sign of any island. Zhang Yuan was unable to endure it and jumped out to ask, "Boss Zhang, are you sure this is the place?" Zhang Quan had needed to pay a large price and a lot of energy to pull him into Maplewood Alliance. If not for Wang Yan, then with his strength to fight for the first 10 rooms, he wouldn't have put the newly formed little alliance in his eyes. But with the start of the trip, Zhang Yuan was in an extremely bad mood. Even if the famous oceanic currents of North Blue were considered as natural disasters and couldn't be predicted, they weren't life-threatening for Flux experts. However, the even of meeting the enormous beast which had almost taken their lives, filled Zhang Yuan's belly with fire. He hadn't expected that not only would the group be extremely weak, but their luck would also be atrocious. But even then, he endured everything for Wang Yan. However, everything changed when Li Yunmiu appeared. By then, Zhang Yuan was aware that he had no chance. What made him even more furious was that Li Yunmiu's strength was surprisingly, as the rumors said, concealed deeply. When he tried to pit himself against that youth, he got embarrassed before everyone. After the accumulation of all that, Zhang Yuan was on the verge of exploding. He had forced himself to remain indoors on the ship for half-day, until they had reached their destination. But when he went outside, there was no trace of that so-called isolated island which was their target. Zhang Yuan felt like he had been played by the group of weaklings. Zhang Quan forced a bitter smile onto his face and explained while controlling his anger, "Brother Zhang, you don't need to be hasty. It will appear soon. We previously discovered a secret: the island only appears on a specific time." "Humph, I will believe your words for the last time. If I don't see our target until tomorrow, I won't mind having some fun with your Maplewood Alliance. I am not so free to keep you company on stupid excursions." Zhang Yuan coldly snorted. His words were full of disdain for the Maplewood Alliance. It was clear that he had already decided to act shamelessly and withdraw from it. Zhang Quan endured everything with a forced smile. But Li Yunmu, who was secretly observing, could see a hint of killing intent in his eyes after he moved behind Zhang Yuan. All the people who had descended from other planes were proud sons and daughters of heavens. Regardless of whatever was their present situation, there was one thing about them which would never change, and that was their temperament. Perhaps they would act maturely and would change their ways of dealing with people for the time being, but the innate sense of superiority which existed within them would never change. When Zhang Yuan acted in an unbridled manner in front of Zhang Chuan and even called Maplewood Alliance a newly formed trifling organization, Zhang Chuan was filled with murderous intent. Seeing it, Li Yunmu only smiled but didn't participate. He wanted to see whether the fierceness of the nobles of the origin world would triumph, or would it be the descender Zhang Chuan who would have the last laugh. After that, everyone waited quietly. Counting the people navigating the ship, there were less than 100 people, and given the goods and supplies that had been prepared for everyone, there was no trouble with a little wait. But during that time, Zhang Yuan, who had already lost all decorum, began to make his moves. He used his time and walked all around the ship trying to entice the few high-level experts of Maplewood Alliance. The result needn't be said, given his prestige in the 15th residential region as well as his efforts to instigate others. 2 of the 3 high-class experts had been persuaded by him within half a day. Like that, Zhang Yuan's influence in the group increased, and he began to brazenly act like Zhang Chuan was only the figurehead of the organization. How could this be endured? Li Yunmu, who was watching everything, could already anticipate that the descenders would definitely be unable to endure it. Regardless of whether it was Zhang Chuan or Luo Honghua, neither of them was willing to hand over the organization they had built after so much hard work. As for Wang Yan, she was a completely different person by then. After experiencing the attack of the enormous beast's attacks, the remaining hint of rationality had completely evaporated from Wang Yan's mind. After getting a new lease on life, she felt that her mission wasn't as important as her life. So when she saw Li Yunmu again, all of her reservations went away, and she only wanted to stay by his side. As for the mission, she left it all to Zhang Chuan and Luo Honghua. She withdrew from struggling for power, which was exactly for what the other 2 had been looking. Brother Yunmu, how far is your homeland from Blue Moon Island? Very, very far away. In order to come to North Blue to gain experience, I had to use the transfer channel 3 times. Li Yunmu was having a big headache. As Wang Yan revealed her feelings for him, his headache continued to increase. Truthfully, Wang Yan wasn't bad. It's just that when people said that fate is imaginary, it sounded quite reasonable, but sometimes, one would discover that they had been thoroughly F***ed by that same fate. For example, Li Yunmu's mind wasn't on Wang Yan, who was sitting near him, but the person whom he had met not long ago, Night. Even then, he still remembered her deep and serene eyes. While Wang Yan attached herself to Li Yunmu, Zhang Yuan, who had successfully persuaded the 2 high-level experts of the alliance to join his side, started raising problems. His target wasn't Zhang Chuan, but the person who had caused him great loss of face and also had stolen his wife, Li Yunmu. At that moment, the trio was making all sorts of schemes in Zhang Yuan's cabin. But Li Yunmu paid no attention to them because his target wasn't Zhang Yuan. In fact, he believed that he wouldn't even need to act. Zhang Chuan and Luo Honghua would be the first to be unable to endure their actions. So he chose to wait. Slowly, time passed. When it was the dead of the night, the breeze was still and waves quiet. At that moment, Zhang Chuan raised the alarm to wake everyone. Soon the group who had been woken up from sleep assembled on the front deck. One person couldn't control their anger and asked, "Boss Zhang, I want to know why have you woken all of us in the middle of the night?" When Li Yunmu looked in the speaker's direction, he immediately recognized the guy as one of the 2 high-level experts under Zhang Yuan. His name, if Li Yunmu remembered correctly, was Lei Jun. He was a barbarian and possessed a tyrannical body. His strength was pretty good and he occupied the 33rd room in the 15th residential region. Chapter 388, Worthless Human Lives. Everyone should control their tempers. Since I have summoned everyone here at midnight, then naturally there's something to do. You all just need to wait for an hour. When that time comes, even if I don't explain anything, all of you will still understand, Zhang Chuan said mysteriously. Once everyone heard it, they immediately understood that it was related to the mission they were carrying out and instantly calmed down. Perhaps they didn't have much sense of belonging to a newly established organization, but none of them would refuse the benefits. Otherwise, why had they come there? So they continued to wait. After some time, just when Zhang Yuan was on the verge of losing his temper again, a transformation happened in the sea near them. An enormous wave suddenly rose up in the tranquil ocean. The several hundred meters large cruise ship was like a helpless tree leaf that began to move up and down. However, everyone's mind wasn't focused on that. After all, not only did the enormous ship possess a robust hull, it also had a group of experienced boatmen controlling it. Even if the wave was large, no one would fear it. If the enormous ship toppled, that would be extremely shocking to the group. They weren't far from the wave, and soon saw the space begin to distort. Dimensional space, I truly hadn't expected that this region would have concealed an ownerless dimensional space. Zhang Yuan's expression changed, following which he became greatly excited. Others also weren't slow to respond. Seeing the transformation in space not far from them, all of them became extremely excited. None of them had expected that the secret island discovered by Zhang Chuan would be an ownerless dimensional space. What did this imply? It meant that if they could hold it, all the resources within it would belong solely to them. How is it? Isn't this small island concealed deeply? When we investigated it before, we discovered that there were no humans present on it. Although Zhang Chuan didn't understand what the dimensional space mentioned by Zhang Yuan meant, he did see that the effects of the island's appearance were just as he expected. After he noticed the intense excitement on the faces of everyone present, he felt truly happy. As for Li Yunmu, he was also quite excited. He had heard about the dimensional spaces of the origin world from the sea breeze whale not too long ago, but he hadn't expected that he would encounter one so quickly. Although none of them had used the juice from the space world tree to sense the existence of the dimensional space, the other descenders had clearly known that the island's dimensional space would appear at a certain time. When Zhang Chuan saw a hint of concealed passion in the eyes of the usually calm Li Yunmu, he became even more complacent and couldn't help but continue speaking. This island only appears at a special time. I've heard that it will only float up for a small time each year, but as long as we occupy it and ensure our safety, we can have it for ourselves for a year. After his words, the spatial fluctuations in the water near them became increasingly more intense. Gradually, a small island of the same size as Azure Dragon Island rose in the empty ocean. The island was shrouded by a purple mist which gave it an even more mysterious feeling. Let's go. It will only stay there for a short moment. If we miss it, we will have to wait for next year. Boatman, move. Zhang Quan's excitement reached the peak at that moment. An excited smile appeared on Luo Honghua's face too. This was their secret. If not for them giving directions, how could the newcomers who had entered Blue Moon Island less than a year ago discover such a concealed mystical island? Wang Yan, however, was slightly distracted. She hadn't expected that the island would appear so quickly. It meant that they would have the opportunity to return to their plane in the future, and she subconsciously gazed at Li Yunmu, wanting to say something. What, you don't look happy? Li Yunmu had keen senses. He instantly noticed the change in Wang Yan's expression. It's nothing, I suddenly thought of you. If would you be willing to go to a completely unknown? Wang Yan hesitantly spoke in a winded manner when. Wang Yan, what do you think you are doing? Before she could complete her sentence, Luo Honghua began shouting loudly, barring her from speaking any further. For Zhang Yuan and others, seeing the depression of a beautiful woman just seemed bizarre. However, Li Yunmu's heart was shaken. The island definitely had some relation to the other descenders returning to their plane. There seemed to be some method in the territory of Blue Moon Island regarding their return to their Earth. It was no wonder then that the quasi-deities and battle sages didn't hesitate in paying any price to send their representatives to the origin world to fight for a chance to become a deity. However, the quasi-deities from all planes, how could they know of the situation on the other side? At that moment, Li Yunmu became almost certain that his group of people was not the first to have been sent to the origin world. The quasi-deities of all planes should have been trying their best for quite a while. Moreover, their representatives should have succeeded, just that at the most critical time, some unknown power had to have obstructed them, even getting rid of them. This theory allowed Li Yunmu to explain why there hadn't been any descenders in the territory of Blue Moon Island. Under Zhang Quan's fierce command, the boatman quickly urged the boat toward the island. But at that moment, the young man gave a meaningful look to the members loyal to him. There was no need to mention that the boatman couldn't be allowed to return. After the appearance of the island's dimensional space, whether it was Zhang Quan or Zhang Yuan or any other member, all of them were aware that the ordinary boatmen couldn't be allowed to return to the island with their secret. The clever boatmen sensed something and were trying to slow the ship's speed at all cost, but they were unable to conceal it from the Flux experts. "Kill all of them," Zhang Yuan suddenly shouted, full of killing intent. That matter was originally under the leadership of Zhang Quan, but since Zhang Yuan already considered the island as his own territory, he surpassed the other in command and gave the order to exterminate. "If we kill them, how will we return to Blue Moon Sect?" one person asked. "T. If we can have all the resources on this island, which mother Faster will want to return?" Lei Jun scolded him. Chapter 389, Betrayal. After that, the situation spiraled out of control. There were 23 members in Maplewood Alliance. Among them, Li Yunmu, Wang Yan, Luo Honghua, Zhang Quan, and Zhang Yuan didn't attack. The others, however, didn't hesitate in raising the butcher's knife and throwing all the boatmen into the ocean right away. Although they didn't kill the boatmen directly, North Blue was different from oceans of the earth. Ordinary people thrown into water far from the coast were just like food being thrown into a fish tank. In a short while, there were countless twisting and coiling creatures in the vicinity of the cruise ship. The sharp-toothed vicious fish gathered together and tore apart the boatmen. In the blink of an eye, the ocean water was covered by a layer of blood. By then, it was clear to Li Yunmu that the lives of slaves and ordinary people were completely worthless in the eyes of Flux experts. Even if they received the protection of an administrative region, no one would care about their deaths once anything was done out of sight. It wasn't like the officials didn't have any other jobs to waste time on carrying out an investigation for a dead person. After getting rid of the boatmen, the group of people immediately unloaded the small boats and began to move toward the island, which was less than 1 nautical mile away. Although the unloaded ships were called small boats, they were still more than 10 meters long. They were also created from the iron pistol wood, so they naturally wouldn't be destroyed by the attacks of vicious beasts. On top of that, since every person in the group was a Flux experts, the vicious beasts with limited horizons who jumped at the ships would suffer from the attacks of the cultivators riding them. In that manner, more than 10 vicious beasts died. Once so many bodies littered the water, others finally stopped attacking the small boats. In the meantime, everyone was quickly urging their small boats forward. Thump! The sound of a bubble bursting echoed, and the small boats entered the purple mist which was enveloping the island. When everyone looked around, they discovered that the world around them had changed. Behind them, North Blue as well as the enormous cruise ship had disappeared. There was only the purple mist all around them. My God, this is truly a dimensional space which hasn't yet been discovered. Zhang Yuan sat with a stupefied expression, mumbling to himself as if he was in a dream. In the end, under the signal from Zhang Quan, Luo Honghua asked, "Brother Zhang, what's this dimensional space you've mentioned so many times?" "What? You people don't know what a dimensional space is?" Lu Yanggui, another expert persuaded by Zhang Yuan, asked with an odd tone. When Li Yunmi saw him looking at Luo Honghua like a Martian, he smiled faintly. That was the difference between the descenders and the natives of the origin world. Sometimes, there was some basic knowledge which the descenders didn't know about. I really don't know, Luo Honghua replied while putting on a brave face. With the situation having deteriorated before, both Zhang Chuan and Luo Honghua harbored killing intent toward the members who had been pulled in by Zhang Yuan. Thus, it didn't matter to them even if the other party thought that they were somewhat odd. It was just that right then wasn't the best time to start attacking. Wow, I truly hadn't expected that there would be some nobles who wouldn't have heard of dimensional spaces, Zhang Yuan said disdainfully. By then, he was certain that Zheng Quan's group were nobles who were far from the central continent. They didn't possess any power and had completely regressed, similar to the nobles of countryside on Earth. But he didn't once consider that they might be people from another world. I've once heard from the elders that there are countless dimensional spaces in our world, constantly changing in all aspects. The dimensional space here clearly hadn't been discovered and so its resources hadn't been exploited. Ha ha ha, this trip truly wasn't in vain, the heavens are helping me. Zhang Yuan and the experts who he had roped in, Lei Jun and Lu Yanggui, burst out laughing. In their opinion, the situation had been settled long ago. Since the three of them who were the most powerful had joined hands, the right of leadership belonged to them. Thus they naturally wouldn't bother to cover it up. All the humans in the origin world were like that. Once they obtained absolute strength, they would abandon all false pretenses of friendship and kick the other party down. Zhang Chuan, perhaps you don't know, but we want to make something clear. Although you people haven't heard of dimensional spaces, you only need to know it means a lot of benefits and resources. This being said, we now propose a cooperation. We 8 people will collect 70% of the resources while the remaining 30% will go to you. Zhang Yuan finally revealed his fangs. In one line, he demanded for 70% of the resources in the dimensional space. When the other members of Maplewood Alliance saw the group of 8 who had rebelled for the first time, their complexions turned unsightly. Apart from Zhang Yuan, Lei Jun, and Lu Wanjai, the other people were also pretty strong, all of them occupied rooms among the first 70. Although Zheng Quan's side was greater in number and had 15 people, it didn't mean much. Apart from the comparatively honest Liu Zhong who occupied the 37th room and was somewhat powerful, only the descenders occupied rooms within the first 60. The remaining members were all outside the first 100 or had barely started cultivating. With both sides clearly standing on the opposite, their strengths and weaknesses were quite clear. Not to mention Zhang Yuan, who had the strength to occupy one of the first 10 rooms, Liu Zhong wasn't even a rival for the combined strength of Lei Jun and Lu Yanggui. On top of that, the 5 members who formed the core strength of Maplewood Alliance had also been pulled to the other side. Why are all of you doing this? I would like to ask when I, Luo Honghua, have treated you badly? Why are you betraying Maplewood Alliance? Luo Honghua asked the people standing behind Zhang Yuan. Her words were the nonsense of an inexperienced sore loser. A fine bird chooses for itself in which tree to nest. 1. I am sorry Luo Honghua, but circumstances are more powerful than people, and we want to survive, one person on Zhang Yuan's side said with a hint of shame. The others also slightly lowered their heads. Zhang Yuan patted the speaker's shoulder and said in consolation, "It doesn't matter. Your actions were indeed correct. I am convinced that anyone would choose the same as you when faced with such a situation. The small benefits offered by Zhang Chuan and his lot aren't good enough to put your lives in danger." Chapter 390, Purple Mist Passage. When the experts thought about it, they did realize that it wasn't worth to put their life at risk because of some small favors. After realizing that, their complexions started to get better. Li Yunmu had to accept that Zhang Yuan was quite skilled compared to Zhang Chuan, who had barely matured and only understood the benefits of using a carrot but didn't pay enough stress on using his personal strength. How about it, Zhang Chuan? You won't make a loss. You had been good to us, so I suggest you to agree. Given the large amount of resources in the dimensional space, even 30% will be more than enough for your future cultivation, Lu Yanggui said with a smile. Zhang Quan's expression remained gloomy for a long time, but he yielded in the end. What can I do about it? Perhaps your words are correct, circumstances are more formidable than people. Although this region was discovered by me and Maplewood Alliance also founded by me after paying a great price for it, since all of you decided on it, how could we not agree? That's right. Since this matter is already settled, we shall begin to exploit this island together. Zhang Yuan quickly made his move without the slightest hint of modesty. While taking control of the alliance, his gaze intentionally or not kept lingering on Wang Yan and Li Yunmia, who was standing near her. Soon, he personally called out 2 people from Zhang Quan's group and asked them to find a path to enter the island. The intention behind his plan to cooperate was his need for cannon fodder. When Zhang Quan understood that, his complexion grew ugly, but he didn't say anything. With a wave of his hand, he quickly sent 2 unlucky members to look for a path. At that moment, he was unable to stop Zhang Yuan. The 2 people chosen to find the path could only regret choosing the wrong group and summon their courage to walk ahead of everyone, step by step following the passage formed by the purple mist into the island. They were at the most outer perimeter of the island, which seemed quite safe at first glance. But they had to penetrate deeply if they wanted to truly exploit the island's dimensional space. Moreover, the path to reach the depths of the dimensional space was a passage through the purple mist which was wide enough for 3 people to walk side by side. No one knew when the purple mist would end or what would they encounter at the end of the channel. They could only watch the 2 of unlucky fellows enter the channel cautiously. Everyone waited for a quarter of an hour, until suddenly there was a shadow at the end of the passage. The 2 members who had been sent to scout the passage returned. Once they left the passage, they reported directly to Zhang Yuan. Boss Zhang, we verified that after passing through the violet mist, there is a large subtropical island which a very large jungle that has many life forms. We didn't dare to be rash and immediately returned to report to you. Zhang Quan's inability to control the situation and a sort of betrayal without the slightest hesitation had allowed them to realize that they had chosen the wrong side. Haha, that's right. Your performance was good. Come, drink this and go to the rear to rest. When Zhang Yuan heard their words, he burst out laughing and allowed the 2 of them to go to the rear of the group. It didn't need to be said that although the 2 had chosen the wrong side at the beginning, it wasn't too late for them to change. They quickly betrayed Zhang Quan. Although they weren't given any position, they wouldn't need to go scout ahead for a time. When the other members of Zhang Quan's group saw this, their expressions changed. In no time, there were 2 members who stepped forward of their own initiative. Boss Zhang, we know our mistakes. We request that you take us under your command. We will obey all of your orders. Come, since you see your mistakes, then naturally I will allow you to join me. Go stand at the back, Zhang Yuan said in an imperious tone. With such an example, 4 more people instantly came forward and requested to join. Zhang Yuan didn't stop any of them, and in the blink of an eye, 8 people from Zhang Quan's side had defected. Soon, Maplewood Alliance, which had had many members, only had the 3 descenders, Lu Zhong, Li Yunmu, and 2 women who had good moral integrity. You all are just a bunch of lowlifes, the 2 descenders rained curses on the group of defectors. But given that situation had reached that point, they were unable to change anything. During the whole process, Li Yunmu was just watching Zhang Yuan. Although his methods were quite clever, he apparently didn't realize that in front of absolute strength, every trick was useless, all the voices of dissent were like chickens and dogs. Thus, he kept watching everything as a spectator. He was extremely interested in knowing what sort of trump card would Zhang Quan and his companions would use in such a situation. In truth, Zhang Yuan's actions were completely according to his plans. He glanced at Zhang Quan and discovered that although that proud son of heaven had an indignant expression on his face, there was a hint of a sneer concealed in his eyes. Instantly, Li Yunmu became even more vigilant. Let's go, we will enter the island, Zhang Yuan loudly commanded. Since there was no danger at the end of the passage, he took the lead with others following after. At the end was Zhang Quan's group, Li Yunmiu being the last of them. Originally he was just waiting for a good drama, to see what sort of tricks Zhang Quan had hidden, but as soon as he stepped in the passage of purple mist, he received a pleasant surprise. Notice, highly dense flux energy detected. Host, this passage contains a dense flux energy. This seems to be a plane where flux energy can be collected as mentioned by Sea Breeze Whale, the system said, its voice suddenly echoing in Li Yunmiu's consciousness. See. What? System, are you sure? Li Yunmiu was completely shocked by the system's notice. The Sea Breeze Whale had mentioned that there were dimensional spaces with dense flux energy which could be gathered and used to refine soul-binding pills. It could be eaten by flux experts to further their cultivation of flux energy or to help physical flux experts to cultivate to flux expert level. In simple terms, if there wouldn't be any method to gather flux energy and use it for cultivation, then all the cultivators in the origin world would be physical flux experts. But after they learned to exploit the flux energy to transform their bodies, their lives changed, and humanity began to grow increasingly more formidable. However, Li Yunmiu knew that of the countless dimensional spaces in the origin world, there were only a few whose density of flux energy was high enough that it could be collected. If they weren't that rare, then the secret of flux binding pills wouldn't be under the control of a limited number of people. Yet the secret island discovered by Zhang Quan and his group of descenders was surprisingly such a dimensional space. Was that a coincidence? While thinking about that, Li Yunmiu couldn't calm himself anymore.